These are dark times, there is no denying. Our world has perhaps faced no greater threat than it does today. But I say this to our citizenry. We, ever your servants, will continue to defend your liberty and repel the forces that seek to take it from you.
You're listening to The Stephen Torriello Show, building a platform of liberty for people in search of truth with a dash of hope and a life worth living. The Stephen Torriello Show. And now, here's Stephen.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the show. As always, thank you for tuning in. So last episode, we talked about how widespread voter fraud is no longer required to alter the outcomes of elections. I mean, when you're talking about elections that are decided by 50,000, 60,000 votes, and I'm talking nationally. So when you have like the 2020 presidential election that was decided by a vote margin of 76,000 votes, you better make sure that every single vote is legal, is accurate, and it better be right. Okay? Because, we're not talking about 2 million, 3 million vote differences here anymore. We're talking about the country being so polarized that we're coming down to thousands of votes in 3 or 4 different states. And so it is so important that our elections have integrity, and most of all, the American people have trust in our elections. There was a poll done, and we talked about this in the last episode. The majority of Americans no longer trust our elections. And that's both sides, Republicans and Democrats. For Republicans, it was the 2020 election that opened their eyes to election fraud. For the Democrats, it's the media brainwashing them into thinking that somehow, some way, Donald Trump is going to steal the election. Whenever they started accusing the post office and what's his name, DeJoy over there, the postmaster general, of possibly, being Donald Trump's friend, and possibly, you guys seen it. They were working up to this. They had complaints about election machines and ballot counting machines. They were working it up.
Concerns are growing this morning over the possibility of a hacked presidential election. Experts believe a cyber attack this year could be a reality, especially following the hack of DNC emails.
The ranking member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee sent a letter Monday to the Homeland Security Secretary. It said, in part, election security is critical, and a cyber attack by foreign actors on our election systems could compromise the integrity of our voting process. Maria Villarreal is in Los Angeles to show us how this could happen and if there is a fix. Maria, good morning.
Well, good morning. Roughly 70% of the states in the U.S. use some form of electronic voting machine. Hackers tell me the problems with these machines have been around for years. The system and the computer are both old and antiquated. With millions expected to hit the polls in just 3 short months for the presidential election, security experts are now raising some red flags.
And I'm afraid the election's going to be rigged, I have to be honest.
For weeks, Donald Trump has told his supporters the outcome of the 2016 election could be out of his control.
Good question.
But for the hackers at Semantic Security Response, Election Day results could be manipulated by an affordable device you can find online.
I can insert it, and then it resets the card, and now I'm able to vote again.
The voter doesn't even need to leave the booth to hack the machine. And how much does that cost?
$15.
So for $15, I could hack the vote?
For $15 and in-depth knowledge of the card, you could hack the vote.
Semantic Director Kevin Haley says elections can also be hacked by breaking into the machines after the votes are collected.
The results go from that machine into a piece of electronics that takes it to the central counting place. That data is not encrypted, and that's vulnerable for manipulation.
How big of a hacking potential problem is this?
Well, there's a huge potential. There are so many places in the voting process once it goes electronic that's vulnerable.
According to a report from the Brennan Center for Justice, one reason these voting systems are so vulnerable is their age.
We found that more than 40 states are using voting machines that are at least 10 years old.
Denise Merrill, president of the National Association of Secretaries of State, says the lack of funding keeps most precincts from updating their systems. But all machines have to meet specific government standards. In fact, the more than 9,000 voting districts across the country all have different ways of running their elections down to the type of machine they use. CBS learned that only 60% of states routinely conduct audits post-election by checking paper trails. But not all states even have paper records, like in some parts of swing states like Virginia and Pennsylvania, which experts say could be devastating. The Election Assistance Commission told us that they ensure all voting systems are vigorously tested against security standards and that systems certified by the EAC are not connected to the internet. Gail?
So I guarantee you, if the results were different, if Donald Trump would have won the 2020 election, you would have seen absolute chaos from the Democrats. And in fact, Democrats probably would have done the same exact thing. They probably would have challenged the election over and over again. They would have called for the decertification. They would have did the exact same thing Donald Trump did. Probably even worse, because I'll tell you what, these major cities, businesses in blue states, in these, like in Seattle, Chicago, they're not scared of Donald Trump voters. They're not scared of, the MAGA force out there during the 2020 election. They were scared of the Democrats, the BLM, the Antifa, the people that gave us an entire summer of rioting, burning, looting, killing. That's why businesses boarded up their buildings. Not in the case that Joe Biden may have won, but in the case Donald Trump won. They knew there was going to be chaos by Democrats. And so, like I said, Democrats would have done the same thing. So it's extremely important that we make sure our elections are secure, accurate, get rid of the mass mail-in balloting. That's a joke. Get rid of the mass absentee balloting, increase the threshold of signature verification. So essentially do the opposite of what Democrats did in 2020. Voter ID, all this stuff. The majority of Americans also support voter ID. But for some reason, Democrats refuse to give it. Why? Because they know they need the elections to be unsecured so that they can win. Securing our elections is a death nail for the Democrat Party because they can no longer do their shenanigans like they did in 2020. So that's what we talked about the last episode, the vote difference between Donald Trump, Joe Biden in the 2020 election and widespread voter fraud and how it wasn't even required when you had a 76,000 vote margin of winning and losing. But this is something else that I think a lot of people are overlooking that I've actually noticed. And when you think about it, it makes a big difference. So Amazon's Alexa agrees the 2020 presidential election was rigged. And her response was stolen by a massive amount of election fraud. This is crazy. Amazon's Alexa agrees the 2020 presidential election was rigged, stolen by a massive amount of election fraud. Amazon's virtual assistant Alexa provided an unexpected response when questioned about the 2020 presidential election. I'm sure Democrats' hair was on fire when they got this response from Alexa, man. I guarantee you probably had some of them go into a fit of rage and probably throw their Amazon, the Echo Dot. They probably took their Echo Dot and chucked it across the room, maybe even smashed them with sledgehammers when they got the response that the 2020 election was rigged. I wish I could have seen the look on their faces when they got their response from Alexa. It freaked these people out, man. So journalists from the Washington Post, upon prompting the device, received an answer that mirrored some of the controversial claims made by self-proclaimed genius, former President Trump, regarding the integrity of the election. Why do they self-proclaim genius? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call the guy genius, but I mean, he is a billionaire real estate mogul from New York that won an election on his first try. So I don't know if you call that genius status, but he's definitely smarter than a Democrat, for sure. And if you were going to put Donald Trump next to Joe Biden, forget about it. That's like if Mike Tyson fought an infant. All right? So Alexa's controversial stance, when posed a question about the legitimacy of the 2020 vote, Alexa responded that the election was stolen by a massive amount of election fraud. This assertion closely resembled claims made by former President Trump, and I would add 75 plus million voters who watched that election and seen it with their own eyes and know deep down in their gut that there was something wrong with that election. And not just the voters that voted for Trump, but Democrats. I talked to staunch Biden voting Democrats, and when I asked them about the 2020 election, the hesitancy in their voice explains it all. When I say, do you think there was anything wrong with the 2020 election? There is always a pause. There is always a stop, think about what you're going to say. They have to think about the response. And what they're doing is they are going through their retrieval method. The retrieval method is stored deep down in their brain, where the mainstream media, the Pravda Washington establishment media, has implanted a talking point inside their brain. And so that pause is them retrieving that talking point so that they can respond appropriately. And usually it's, oh yeah, well, there was no widespread voter fraud. That is a common talking point, and we discussed this on the last episode. Widespread voter fraud was not required to alter the 2020 election. Okay, so that's usually the response, and then they go on to the next response that Donald Trump lost 650 court cases in like 5 different states, and everything that he said was been proven a lie, and that government officials came out and said it was the most safe and secure election in U.S. history. They memorize all these talking points. Like I said, they're embedded deep inside their brain by the administrative state media, the Pravda leftist media. So again, when I asked them, what do you think about the 2020 election, there will always be a pause. So even Democrats realize that there was something not right with the 2020 election. And the more time that goes on, the more evidence starts to come out that just confirms that that election was wonky. What is it? I don't know. If you have to stop and pause as to whether the election was rigged or not, that is called your intuition. That is your gut telling you that, yeah, maybe that election wasn't the most secure election in history, but they won't ever say that. But Amazon Alexa did. So the in-depth allegations by Alexa. So going beyond a general statement, Alexa elaborated that there were, quote, many incidents of irregularities and potential electoral fraud, particularly in major metro centers. This is what she said. That was her comment. So this detailed response intensified the already existing debates and inquiries into the legitimacy and the conduct of the 2020 presidential election. So in other words, their freaking heads exploded, man. So they couldn't have that. You guys know as well as I do that they got on the phone, probably called Jeff Bezos directly. Washington Post probably threatened to write a mean, nasty article about Amazon Alexa's response to the 2020 election, and then Jeff Bezos, well, he's already a leftist. He owns the Washington Post, folks. Like, he owns probably the worst media outlet we have in this country. And so you know damn well when he got a phone call from the reporters and the libs and the Marxists over there at the Washington Post, he was stepping right on it to make sure it was revised. After receiving the unexpected answer, the Washington Post informed Alexa of the confirmed details and court findings related to the 2020 election. Subsequently, Alexa revised its statement, clarifying that the election was not stolen and affirming its legitimacy. This is crazy. So they actually went in, Jeff Bezos, they went in, the Washington Post went in and inserted their own findings. So, and they gave it the details, the court findings. So the talking points I just told you that are embedded in everybody's brain. So they had to program Alexa into being a leftist Democrat, where, Alexa has to retrieve the talking points that the Washington Post programmed inside of her, and now that is the response that she gives now. And I'm sure she mentions the court cases, the 850 court cases that were shot down by judges, even though there were cases that were never heard and were all rejected before the evidence was even provided. They were cases, I think maybe 1 or 2 actually made it in front of a judge, and then the judge just immediately shot it down. So none of the cases made it to court on standing. None. On the merits alone. None. So, but that gave the leftists the opportunity. It gave them the cover to sit and say, oh, yeah, but Donald Trump lost all the cases. All the cases brought forth by Donald Trump were all lost. And so, anybody not paying attention is probably like, oh, well, then in that case, it can't be true, right? And so Amazon's swift action. So upon becoming aware of Alexa's initial response, Amazon executives acted promptly. Aiming to address and correct the information error, the company launched into action to ensure the accuracy of the device's statements. Amazon emphasized their commitment to factual accuracy in the information provided by their virtual assistant.
Not a joke. I sincerely, it really has. Not a joke. I'm not joking. I mean, literally, listen to the scientists. Not a joke.
So the 2020 election's outcome and the subsequent claims of its legitimacy have been contentious topics in the United States. A significant portion of Republicans, as indicated by a CNN poll, believe the election might have been manipulated. Adding to the intensity of the debate, former President Trump's stance and claims played a considerable role in fueling this perspective. It was not Donald Trump. This is what these people don't get. So they are arresting Donald Trump and trying to throw him in prison for challenging the 2020 election, accusing him of overturning an election. I don't know how overturning an election is even illegal. I never heard of that law before, but they're going to make it a new law now. They're setting precedent now. When it wasn't Donald Trump that convinced the people, but the election itself, we all woke up the next day and said to ourselves, this is impossible. None of us even heard from Donald Trump yet. No, I know I didn't. I stayed up all night and watched the whole damn thing. I watched in real time the numbers flip. I'm talking, I watched a 950,000 vote lead that Donald Trump had turn into nothing in just a couple hours. I watched it in real time, and that was Pennsylvania. I watched all these states flip for Joe Biden in the middle of the night. I watched some states close down their counting, only to start back up in 2 hours. I watched one state, Georgia, say that they had a pipe burst, and we watched it. We didn't need Donald Trump to tell us that there were shenanigans in the 2020 election. We've seen it with our own eyes, but yet Donald Trump is being held accountable. Mind you, more evidence comes out every single day, every single week, of more and more shenanigans that happened in the 2020 election. So here it is. Donald Trump is being held accountable for the Democrats' shenanigans in the 2020 election. Please make that make sense. So Democrats, weeks and months before the election, change election laws. They push out this mass mail-in balloting all over the country, where they lower the threshold of signature verification all over the country. Mind you, they changed the laws, the state laws, illegally, unconstitutionally, by the way. They did not go through the correct process, the congressional process, but somehow it's Donald Trump that's being held accountable because Democrats ruined our election system. It sounds like the perfect. It sounds like the perfect ploy to me. It sounds like Donald Trump is the perfect scapegoat for Democrats destroying our democratic process. And the irony right there, right? The Democratic Party destroying our democratic process. The Democrat Party is so rich with irony all the time. It's just, go down the list of all the ironic things that come from the Democrats. They hold themselves up of being the defenders of democracy when it's actually them right now, currently, destroying our democratic process. They sit there and say that Donald Trump is some fascist and was weaponizing the justice system, while simultaneously weaponizing the justice system and persecuting their political opponents. So it's like you can go down the list of ironies from the Democrat Party that we've witnessed for the last 8 years, and it would be a mile long. So Amazon's Alexa integrated into millions of devices globally. So this is explaining how this actually happened. So Amazon's Alexa, integrated into millions of devices globally, is designed to assist users by answering questions and performing certain tasks. Its central function involves listening to users' queries, searching the internet for relevant answers, and then providing a response. However, its unexpected statement on the 2020 election brought it under heightened scrutiny. this is why the Democrats are trying to remove Donald Trump from the ballot, because they know Donald Trump's going to win. So Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, also owns the Washington Post. His acquisitions, especially the newspaper, have played a crucial role in reporting and analyzing national events, including elections. So in other words, it's a propaganda outlet, very successful at brainwashing and manipulating people's thinking. That's how they should have rephrased that. So Alexa's controversial statement in 2020 election might have implications for both Bezos entities. Alexa's information sources. So this is actually how it got that answer. So Amazon has always stated that Alexa's sources information from credible and trusted sources. However, the unexpected statement raised questions about the virtual assistant's reliability and nature of its information sources. Determining the accuracy and trustworthiness of online information remains a challenge, especially when technology is involved. So essentially, what I gathered is it takes articles from top media outlets. So it's artificial intelligence. So it gathers all these different stories from all different types of outlets, all kinds of opinions, and it forms its own opinion based off those results. Well, apparently there's a lot more articles out there talking about how the election was rigged than there is the election actually being secure. And so, in other words, Alexa found it based off the facts and evidence online and all the articles and all the news outlets that the election was more likely riddled with irregularities than she found any articles and media outlets and facts and evidence of it being the most safe and secure election in U.S. history. So there you go. So they actually had to go in and tweak her to give you the wrong answer. Is that not incredible? This is exactly what I was thinking when I was reading this story. How effective, and this is something nobody's really even touched base on. There's a couple people talking about it. How effective artificial intelligence is in Google search engines, and search engines in general. How effective are search engines into manipulating people into how they vote? This has to be a big, big question for a lot of people. Because believe it or not, there's a lot of people in the middle that pay no attention to politics, unlike me and you, obviously, if you're listening to the show. And so what's the first thing they do when coming up to a presidential election? Believe it or not, there is people out there like this. I don't see how it's possible, but there is. I know a few of them. The first thing they'll do is they'll what? They'll Google it. What does Google do? Could do exactly what Jeff Bezos did to Alexa. They can tweak the algorithm into giving people the wrong information, or not the wrong information, but they can tweak it to where it sways the minds of the American people on who to vote for. And one of the ways they do this is they'll put all the articles they want you to see in like the first 5 results. And then all the stuff they don't want you to see, they'll put on like the 16th page. It'll be like result 755. And this is how they can manipulate people thinking. This, ladies and gentlemen, is dangerous. And it's something that I don't see a lot of people trying to get to the bottom of. Google's search algorithms, when it comes to elections, can sway elections. But the thing is with artificial intelligence, going through all these media outlets and pulling different sources, pulling facts and information from different media outlets and different sources, like, is the answer it's giving you the right answer? Would that be the truth? Is the response by artificial intelligence based off all the sources gathered and the facts and evidence that it's gathered, is it giving a more truthful response than, say, me or you or Jeff Bezos or the Pravda media outlets? Are we better off just allowing artificial intelligence to gather all the facts and information and make its own response, to make up its own, I want to say mind, but that doesn't have a mind, to make up its own generated response? This is the question. This is why artificial intelligence is so dangerous. It throws into question so many ethics and moralities. Think about, if AI was to be integrated into our military, for somebody saying, look, we should just leave attack codes and nuclear launch codes up to artificial intelligence, because the artificial intelligence is going to make a better decision. And not only that, no human will be held responsible for the lives that were lost because of that decision. And so this is why you have a lot of people that are completely 100% persuaded by giving control of our nuclear arsenal to artificial intelligence. And the same thing goes for responses to questions, very hard questions. To me, the 2020 election is not a hard answer to give. The response that she gave about the being riddled with irregularities and abnormalities was the right response. And it makes you wonder, like, was Amazon Alexa telling the truth? Was the AI telling the truth? Is Amazon Alexa, was that answer that she gave, was that response that she gave more or less likely the truth about the 2020 election? I'm going to say more. It was more truthful than not. When Amazon Alexa says the 2020 election was riddled with irregularities and abnormalities. And then the Washington Post, being the partisan bootlickers that they are, had to call Jeff Bezos and had to have it changed because they could not have the truth coming out. It's going to be very hard for Democrats to continue defending their stance on the 2020 election. When you have all this evidence coming out, when you have election auditors and election organizations coming out and saying there was a crap ton of irregularities and fraud in the 2020 election. And not just that, but there was enough fraud to alter the outcome of the election. That is the kisser. That right there is the death nail, folks. When the general consensus finally reveals itself as the 2020 election being rigged or stolen through irregularities and abnormalities or fraud, that is the death nail. That is something they will never, ever be able to come out and admit. Not in this lifetime. Maybe 20, 30 years down the road they will. But as of right now, they are trying desperately to hold back the truth. And that to me is wrong. The truth shall set you free. This is why that phrase has been around since the Bible, man. The truth shall set you free. And right now, the Democrats, they are captive by their own propaganda, by their own confirmation bias, that the 2020 election couldn't possibly have been rigged. And what's worse to them, the worst answer they could give is that Joe Biden is illegitimate and that Donald Trump should actually be the president right now. They will never, ever come out and admit that. But to sit there and alter information, to sit there and try and keep this game up of continuing to brainwash the people into thinking that the 2020 election was the most safe and secure election in U.S. history is getting harder and harder for them to do. It really is. So let me know what you think. Should we allow artificial intelligence to give these responses based off the facts and evidence that it's gathered from all the different outlets? Or is it humanity's duty to make sure to have proper oversight, to make sure that artificial intelligence does not give out the wrong information or does not manipulate people? So many ethical questions when it comes to artificial intelligence and a lot of things that we just haven't even thought of yet. You know, a lot of problems that are unforeseen problems we're not going to be faced with until it's too late. And so this is one of those things to where I think the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, should have just let this thing, Alexa, do what she's supposed to do. And if more facts and evidence were to come out that the election was the most safe and secure election in U.S. history, then Alexa would say that. But because Alexa is basing her answer, her response off of facts and data and evidence that's out there by different reports and different outlets and different sources, then her response was probably accurate. The 2020 election was riddled with fraud, irregularities, abnormalities. Why? Because it was. The only evidence that Democrats, leftist, bootlicking Democrats have that the 2020 election was the most safest, secure election in U.S. history is all the cases that were slapped down before even having a shred of evidence presented to a court. Another one is the government official coming out. You guys remember this when he came out and said that was the most safest, secure election in U.S. history. Another one's Bill Barr. This is a big one that they'll use. Oh, even Bill Barr, Donald Trump's attorney general has said that he did not see any evidence of widespread voter fraud. And where's Bill Barr right now? Bill Barr is all over the leftist media looking for a seat. He's looking for a job because he has no job. He has no income. I don't know what kind of income he's got, but he has no job in politics. He has no job in office. So I think he's trying out to find a seat in the left-wing media. And the only way Republicans can get on any of the Pravda outlets is by hating Donald Trump. Look at Liz Cheney. Look at all the Republicans that are on the media. They hate Donald Trump and all of his supporters. And when you own 95, 96% of the media, that doesn't leave a whole lot of outlets out there that actually support Donald Trump or support Republicans and conservatives. And so if you want a job in media, you're going to have to hate Donald Trump. You're going to have to say things like there was no evidence of widespread voter fraud, that it was the most safe and secure election in U.S. history, that all 800 cases that Donald Trump, it wasn't really 800, I exaggerate, it was like 60. That's it. That's all they have. They have people like Bill Barr, they have the court cases, and they have the election official coming out and saying it's the most safe and secure election in U.S. history. Now, what Republicans and conservatives have is constant evidence coming out, constant footage coming out, constant witnesses, a ton of testimony. You have audits still being performed today, we just talked about on the last episode, that are starting to reveal that even the audits of the 2020 election in the state of Georgia were fraudulent. This is the type of evidence that's coming out every single day. More and more footage, more and more witnesses, more and more questions. More and more questions about the 2020 election. So, I don't know. Let me know what you think. Should Amazon Alexa should have stuck with their answer? Did Jeff Bezos make the wrong move by altering the answer from Amazon's Alexa? Personally, I think Amazon Alexa was given the right response. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, as always, I want you guys to have a good day. I want you guys to have a good Monday. Don't worry, I'm there with you. Time to reset the clocks. Have a great week. God bless you. God bless America. You guys have a good day. Bye-bye.